I was eating reconstituted noodles out of a foil packet when the order came through. Not the most cinematic memory, I know. But that's what I was doing, sitting in the cramped little officer alcove off the port corridor, hunched over a packet of what the manufacturer optimistically labeled spicy Szechuan style, trying to decide if the flavor was closer to motor oil or sadness. The lights in that section of the ship were always slightly amber because of some outdated filtration issue in the atmospheric grid that nobody had ever actually fixed. And the hum of the drive cores 3 decks below was doing that low-frequency thing it always did when we were cruising at sublight. This faint, almost musical drone that I'd learned to sleep through but could never quite stop hearing. And then my personal comm tab lit up. Priority red, full command channel, not the kind of notification you ignore. I set the noodles down. They were honestly terrible anyway. By the time I made it to the bridge, 3 minutes, which was fast even by my standards because I took the emergency ladder shaft instead of the corridor route. Captain Alara Mwand was already standing at the central command platform with her arms crossed, and an expression I had seen exactly twice before in 4 years of serving under her. Once when a containment breach threatened to vent our oxygen reserves. Once when we received confirmation that Earth Station Meridian had been deliberately destroyed. It was the expression of someone who had already decided what was going to happen, who was just waiting for the universe to catch up. She didn't look at me when I stepped onto the bridge. She was looking at the forward display, where the star map had been replaced by a diplomatic transmission feed. The kind that automatically routes through the Galactic Confederation's official channels, the ones with the triple-layered encryption that's supposed to make you feel like whatever's being said carries the weight of interstellar civilization behind it. "Lieutenant Commander," she said, "close the door." I closed the door. "The Hedral Dominion," she said, "has issued an ultimatum." And she finally looked at me. "To Earth." Part 2, the setup. Let me tell you what the Hedral Dominion was, because if you're reading this without context, you need to understand the weight of that sentence. The Hedral weren't the oldest species in the Galactic Confederation. That distinction belonged to the Velanthi, who were so old that most of their population had voluntarily downloaded their consciousness into quantum lattice arrays and barely interacted with physical space anymore, existing as something between a civilization and a philosophical concept. The Hedral weren't the largest either. The Gauan Collective spanned 62 star systems and had a population that made humanity's 10 billion look quaint. But the Hedral were, by almost every measurable metric, the most militaristically powerful species that humanity had encountered in our first 40 years of interstellar expansion. They had warships, a lot of warships, and unlike most Confederation members who maintained military capability the way you maintain a fire extinguisher technically there, but preferably never used, the Hedral treated their military the way some old Earth cultures treated religion. It was central. It was identity. Every male Hedral spent 16 years in compulsory service. Every female Hedral spent 12. Their flagship fleet, the Dihor Armada, had not lost a direct engagement in 230 years. 230 years. Humanity had been in space, really in space, reaching other stars' space for 40. So when people back on Earth, back in the early days of contact, asked whether we should worry about the Hedral, the diplomatic answer was always some careful, well-worded version of, "We maintain open channels and mutual respect," which was how diplomats said, "Yes, absolutely, please don't make them angry." The thing that had made them angry this time was a mining consortium. I know, it's almost always something like that. Some species' ancient burial ground, some resource-rich asteroid belt, some corridor of space that 2 different groups thought they had exclusive rights to. In this case, it was a collection of 6 uninhabited planetary bodies in the Vesk corridor, a stretch of transitional space between human and Hedral territory that had been in legal gray area since the original Confederation boundary treaties. A private Earth consortium called Palladium Reach had moved in 6 months ago and started extracting deuterium ice from the third body, Vesk 3. The Hedral said it was their space. Earth's diplomatic response had been measured and careful. We said we respected the Hedral's historical claims and would like to convene a joint review committee. We said the consortium's operation would be paused pending clarification. We said we were committed to a peaceful resolution. The Hedral's response to our measured, careful diplomacy was to position 70 warships at the Vesk corridor's edge and issue a 48-hour ultimatum. Formally cede all human claim to the entire Vesk corridor, not just the disputed bodies, the whole corridor, hundreds of billions of kilometers of space, along with a formal apology and reparations payment to be determined by Hedral authorities. Or else. The or else wasn't specified. It didn't need to be. 70 warships at your doorstep is its own kind of specification. I know all of this not because I was in those initial diplomatic meetings, but because Admiral Tay Khorassani, the man who made the decision that changed everything, included the full briefing in the mission record that I read approximately 40 minutes after I set down my foil packet of terrible noodles. I read it on a data pad while standing in the corridor because the bridge was still too chaotic to find a quiet corner, and our ship's AI, which the crew had named Meridian after the station we'd lost, kept gently reminding me through my earpiece that I was scheduled to report to Tactical in 11 minutes. The briefing was 26 pages. I read all of it. Then I read the last line of the mission record again, because I wanted to make sure I was understanding it correctly. Deployment order, UES Prometheus's end. Immediate departure, destination, Vesk corridor. Diplomatic escort, none. Negotiation team, none. Mission classification, Deterrence Protocol 7. I stood there in the corridor for a moment. Deterrence Protocol 7. I knew what that was. Every officer in the fleet knew what that was. It wasn't a thing that had ever actually been used in the 40 years of human space travel. It existed the way a lot of military protocols exist, as a category of response that you hope, deeply and sincerely, you will never need. It meant we're not sending anyone to talk. The UES Prometheus's end was not a typical warship. I want to be clear about that because warship is a word that gets used pretty liberally. The Hedral had warships. The Gaon had warships. Half the species in the Confederation maintained what they called warships, which were military vessels of various sizes armed with various weapons, all of which were formidable in their own right. The Prometheus's end was something different. She had been built, not commissioned, not retrofitted, not upgraded, actually built from the first strut to the last hull plate at the Kepler Station shipyard over a period of 9 years, under a program so classified that even most of the people who funded it didn't know what they were funding. Her official designation in the public procurement records was Enhanced Long-Range Exploration Vessel, which was one of the more spectacular lies ever told in human bureaucratic history. She was 740 meters from bow to stern. That alone made her the largest purely military vessel Earth had ever launched, not the largest ship, but the largest purpose-built fighting machine. The Confederation's records had her classified as a heavy cruiser because they'd never actually gotten a full sensor read on her, and the designation was based on dimensional estimates from limited scan data. She was substantially more than a heavy cruiser. Her primary weapon system, the one that most people didn't know about, the one that wasn't in any public document, the one that even some of her own crew referred to using only the designation the Array, because the actual technical name was a classified string of alphanumeric code, drew power directly from a pair of modified quantum field reactors that had originally been designed for planetary power generation. 2 of them, modified, on a ship. The engineering team that had figured out how to do that had received a collective classified commendation from the Earth Defense Council, and were never allowed to discuss it publicly. Her hull was layered, not just armored, layered, with alternating sections of density-shifted alloy and ablative composite that gave her a damage tolerance approximately 3 times what her profile would suggest. She had 17 independent weapon batteries, a point defense network so dense that our chief weapons officer, a wiry man named Specialist Redemfara, once described it as trying to get something past a wall made of lightning. She had 4 independent drive systems, 3 of which were backups, because the people who built her wanted to be certain she could always move. She had a crew of 412 humans, all of them chosen specifically, all of them knowing exactly what ship they were serving on. She had never fired her primary weapons in an actual combat engagement. She had never needed to. The few times she had appeared twice at border incidents, once during the Gareth Station crisis, her appearance alone had been sufficient. The other parties had looked at the sensor data. They had looked at each other. They had chosen differently. The Hedral Dominion had never seen her. That was about to change. Part 3. Build tension. 12 hours into our transit toward the Vesk corridor, the Confederation diplomatic relay started transmitting emergency protest notices. I was at my station, the tactical console, port side of the bridge, elevated slightly so I had a clear sightline to both the main display and Captain M1's command platform, when the relay notifications started stacking up in the secondary communications queue. They weren't addressed to us directly. They were addressed to Earth's diplomatic authority, copied to the Galactic Confederation Security Council, and the fact that they were appearing on our relay feed meant that someone at DA had routed them to us specifically. As a courtesy, or a warning, or just because someone thought we should know what we were sailing into. The first one was from the Confederation Secretary General, a Gaon named Velharath Sandys, who had held the position for 12 years and was generally considered measured and careful. The message used words like grave concern and protocol deviation, and strongly urged reconsideration. The second was from the Hedral Dominion's Confederation ambassador, a rigid, elongated being named Sareth Vel, and it was considerably less measured. The words act of provocation appeared twice. So did irreversible consequences. The third was from the Velanthi, or rather, from the fragment of Velanthi consciousness that handled what they called engagement with corporeal affairs, which essentially meant a digital mind so vast it was practically geological, issuing a communication through a translator AI. The Velanthi message was 11 words. We observe with attention. Choose carefully. Some doors do not reopen. That one made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Not because it was threatening, because it wasn't. The Velanthi had watched civilizations rise and fall for longer than humanity had had written language. When they said, choose carefully, it wasn't advice. It was something closer to, I don't know how else to put it, archival notation. They were documenting a moment they considered significant. The kind of significant that history books are written about, not the kind that fades in a news cycle. I pulled up the Hedral fleet disposition on my tactical screen. 70 warships. They had moved them 8 hours ago, repositioned them from a spread formation into something closer to a blocking line across the Vesk corridor's primary approach vectors. The formation told a clear story. They had seen the departure alert from Earth's flight control network. They knew something was coming. They were making sure whatever it was understood they were there. I ran the numbers on their fleet. This was my job, and I was good at my job. In a standard engagement, standard meaning the kind that military theorists model, with 2 opposing forces meeting at approximately equivalent readiness, the Hedral blocking line was formidable. Their lead ships carried torsion cannon arrays that could crack hull plating at significant range. Their electronic warfare capability was sophisticated. Their commanders were experienced. 230 years without a direct engagement loss. That wasn't an accident. That was discipline and capability, and the accumulated tactical wisdom of generations. Against a standard human warship, even a good one, even a very good one, the Hedral blocking line would win. Probably not easily, probably at real cost to themselves, but they would win. I logged my analysis in the tactical record, and then added a note at the bottom that said, "Standard engagement parameters do not apply to this vessel." Then I sat back and watched the stars move. 22 hours in, Meridian, our AI flagged an encrypted communication that had been sent on a frequency we were technically not supposed to be monitoring. It was addressed to the Hedral Dominion Fleet Commander, Admiral Sarath Cade, from the Hedral Dominion's Diplomatic Intelligence Branch. I say technically not supposed to be monitoring, because the encryption was sophisticated but not sophisticated enough for a ship that had been built by the same people who designed its own AI systems. And Meridian had been cracking Hedral cipher protocols since we'd first achieved contact range. The message translated read, "Fleet intelligence confirms approaching vessel is registered as human military. Designation, UES Prometheus's End. Classification in Confederation records, Enhanced Exploration Vessel, Revised Estimate, Heavy Cruiser Class. Current registry shows vessel has been deployed 3 times in border incidents, no weapons discharged. Recommend Admiral treat as a demonstration of intent, not a genuine combat threat. Humans are sending a warship to Project Force. They do not want a war. When vessel arrives, maintain formation. Do not fire first. They will offer to negotiate. Accept negotiation. Dictate terms from position of strength." I read that twice. Then I forwarded it to Captain M1's personal channel with a flag marked, "They don't know what we are." She responded 30 seconds later, "One line, I know." 36 hours into transit, I couldn't sleep. This happens to me sometimes on long hauls. Not insomnia exactly, just this particular kind of wakefulness where my brain refuses to stop processing, and my body gives up trying to fight it. I ended up in the observation deck, which is a small room on the upper aft section of the ship, with a viewport that's been engineered for maximum optical clarity, and an absolutely stunning view of whatever happens to be outside. What was outside at that point was deep space. The Vesk corridor was still 12 hours ahead. The stars were thick and cold and absolutely indifferent to everything that was about to happen. I wasn't alone on the observation deck. Chief Engineer Una Katsaros was there, late 30s, compact and deliberate in the way that people who have spent years working in confined machinery spaces tend to become. Hair cut close because longer hair and rotating mechanical components don't mix. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the bulkhead and her legs stretched out, drinking something from a thermal flask and staring at the viewport with the particular expression of someone who is thinking hard about something and has accepted that they won't stop until they're done. "Couldn't sleep either?" I asked. "Slept fine," she said. "Woke up on purpose. Wanted to look at this before things get busy." I sat down next to her. The floor was cold through my uniform trousers. The stars through the viewport were everything. "We're really doing this," I said. It wasn't really a question. "Yep," she took a sip from her flask. "The array's fully charged, by the way. Has been for 6 hours. Didn't see any reason to wait." The array, fully charged and waiting, 3 decks below where we were sitting, coiled like something that had been wound very tight for a very long time. "Do you think they'll back down?" I asked. Una considered that for a moment. "You've seen the Hedral intercept." "Yes." "They think we're coming to negotiate." "Yes." She looked at the stars for a few more seconds. "Then I think they'll have a very educational morning." Part 4, the climax. We dropped out of FTL transit 11 hours and 47 minutes later, at 6:12 ship time, at a distance of approximately 2.3 million kilometers from the Hedral blocking line. Let me explain why that distance matters. For most warships, For any warship the Hedral had ever encountered, 2.3 million kilometers was safe distance. You emerge from FTL at that range. You've given yourself time to assess the situation, time to respond to threats, time for the other side to get a good look at you and understand what they're dealing with. Standard military doctrine across most of the Confederation species. For engagements involving ships of similar capability, put effective combat range somewhere between 800,000 and 1.2 million kilometers. The Prometheus's END's primary weapons had an effective engagement range of 4.7 million kilometers. We had dropped out of FTL already inside the envelope. Meridian announced it quietly through the bridge speakers, the way she announced everything, with a calm that somehow always felt more genuine than programmed. Transition complete. Position confirmed. Hedral fleet elements on sensors. All systems nominal. The bridge was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then every console lit up simultaneously as Hedral sensors swept us. They were good sensors. We had been aware that their sensor arrays were sophisticated, and they were doing exactly what a professional military fleet does when an unknown contact appears. Full spectrum sweep, active and passive, trying to build as complete a picture as possible before deciding what to do next. I watched my tactical display as their data resolved on my screen, the system building a model of what the Hedral fleet commander was seeing on his display right now. He was seeing a ship, that part was clear. He was seeing a ship that was larger than the registry suggested, much larger actually, because the Confederation's records on us were based on partial scan data from 3 brief appearances, and even the best Confederation sensors hadn't gotten a clean full-profile read on us. He was now getting a clean full-profile read on us. His registry said, heavy cruiser class. His sensors were now suggesting something else entirely. He was also seeing the power readings. The Prometheus's end, sitting still in the dark of the Vest corridor approach, idling, not actively doing anything, generated a power signature that most warships generated only during active combat engagement. 2 quantum field reactors drawing for a ship with full crew, full systems active, the array charged and on standby. The energy signature we were passively radiating, just existing there, just being what we were, was something the Hedral had never seen from a human ship. Or from most ships, period. I saw the data on my screen. They hesitated. That was new. In the intercepted intelligence briefing, their orders had been, maintain formation, do not fire first, wait for human negotiation overture. 230 years of successful military operation had built a culture of decisive action inside the Hedral fleet. They were not a species that hesitated. Their doctrine valued initiative and response speed. They hesitated. 47 seconds of sensor sweeping. 47 seconds of, I imagine, increasingly urgent exchanges between Admiral Sareth Cade and his tactical staff. 47 seconds of data that wasn't matching what anyone had been told to expect. Then the comms opened. The hailing signal came in on the standard Confederation diplomatic frequency, which was, itself, a choice. They could have used their military tactical channel. They chose the diplomatic frequency, and I noted that, and I thought about what it meant, and I decided it meant that somewhere in the 47 seconds of processing, someone on that fleet had registered something that made them want to be very careful about what happened next. Captain Mwand looked at me. I nodded, signals clean, channels secure, go ahead. She opened the response channel. This is Captain Alara Mwand of the United Earthship Prometheus's End. Identify yourself. A pause. Not a long one, 3, 4 seconds, but long enough to be notable from a military commander who was accustomed to projecting authority. Captain Mwand. This is Admiral Sareth Cade, commanding the Hedral Dominion Deterrence Fleet, Vesk Station. You are approaching contested space under active claim dispute. Under Galactic Confederation Resolution 4471, vessels approaching contested space during an active diplomatic dispute are required to. I'm familiar with Confederation Resolution 4471, Admiral. Captain M1's voice was absolutely level. No heat in it. No aggression. Just level. I'm also familiar with the terms of your ultimatum to Earth's diplomatic authority, which was issued approximately 51 hours ago. Another pause. The United Earth Government's position. The United Earth Government's position, M1 said, is that I'm standing here. Silence on the channel, not static, not interference. Actual silence, which is different. Static is absence of signal. This silence was the sound of someone processing. I watched my tactical display. The Hedral fleet had not moved. 70 ships still in their blocking formation, sensors running hot, weapons presumably ready but not yet active. They were holding. They were waiting. And I wondered what was happening on that fleet command bridge right now. Whether Admiral Sarath Cade was looking at his tactical display the way I was looking at mine. Whether the numbers were giving him the same feeling they would give any competent military commander who had just properly resolved them for the first time. Captain, the Admiral said, I must inform you that our fleet has standing orders to resist incursion into contested space. You are currently at distance inside our response envelope. I require you to. Admiral, M1's voice hadn't changed in tone, not 1 degree. I'm going to say something to you, and I need you to understand that I'm saying it without any hostility. I'm saying it as one military professional to another. A beat. Your sensors are currently reading our power signature. I'm not going to tell you what that signature means because your tactical staff can already tell you what it means. But I am going to tell you this. We have been on this ship for 48 hours preparing to be exactly where we are right now, and in those 48 hours, not one member of this crew has spent a single minute preparing negotiation talking points. Not 1 minute. We did not bring a diplomatic team. We did not bring a mediation framework. We did not load the standard conflict resolution protocol packages that human ships carry as a matter of course when they're going into a dispute situation. Another beat, shorter this time. We brought our weapons online 4 hours before you saw us on your sensors, because that's how long it takes to fully charge the primary system, and we wanted to be ready. Silence again, longer this time. I checked the sensor board. The Hedral fleet had still not moved, but I was now picking up power fluctuations in their formation, specific to their communications arrays, which meant a lot of urgent talking was happening between ships right now. Captain, Admiral Sarath Cade said, and something in his voice had changed. Not much. He was a professional with 230 years of military tradition behind him, and he wasn't going to crack in one conversation. But something had changed. The cadence was slightly different. The certainty that had been there in the first transmission wasn't quite as absolute. What is it you intend? That depends on you, M1 said. Your ultimatum to Earth asked for cession of the entire Vesk corridor, a formal apology and reparations at Hedral authorities' determination. Those terms are rejected. Then you understand that we are prepared to. We're going to find out, M1 said, exactly how prepared you are. I'll be honest, I held my breath. What happened next lasted 11 minutes and 14 seconds. I know the exact duration because I have the bridge record, which I have listened to more times than I can count, and the timestamp is precise to the 100th of a second. 11 minutes and 14 seconds between the end of Captain M1's last sentence and the next voice on the open channel. In those 11 minutes and 14 seconds, the Hedral fleet moved. Not toward us. That's the important clarification. They moved, repositioned, in a way that was unmistakably tactical, the blocking line reforming into what appeared, on my sensors, to be a combat dispersal pattern. A combat dispersal pattern is what you transition to when you're either preparing to engage or seriously considering it, and it spreads your ships to reduce the effectiveness of wide-area weapons systems. It was a good tactical choice. I noted that in my record. It was also a choice that, in the particular situation of this particular ship, was inadequate. Not because the Hedral didn't understand tactics. They understood tactics extremely well. It was inadequate because the weapons system they were dispersing against wasn't the kind of system that had straightforward counters. Dispersal works against certain weapons paradigms. It works less well against others. The array was in the less well category, and the physics of why that was true were documented in a file on my station that I had read 14 times during our transit and still found slightly difficult to believe. I watched them move on my tactical display. I watched Captain Emwand watching them. She had her hands clasped behind her back, which was a thing she did when she was thinking. She'd been standing for hours. She didn't sit when things were active, never had, in my time with her. She stood and she watched and she thought and she waited. "Meridian," she said quietly. "Captain, give them a reading." Of course. What Meridian did in response to that instruction was activate a specific subset of the array's emitter systems, not firing them, not using them for anything, just bringing them live, which generated a power signature and a sensor return that any military-grade sensor array, including the Hedral Fleet sensor array, would be able to resolve clearly. The Hedral Fleet sensors had been sweeping us consistently since we arrived. Those sweeps were visible on my board as sensor contacts. I could see the sweeps, could see their data packets hitting our hull, could see the return data. What I watched happen in real time as Meridian brought the array emitters live was a change in the character of those sensor sweeps. They got slower. Not much, a fraction. But sensor sweeps get slower when the system is trying to process returns that it doesn't have good reference data for, when what's coming back doesn't match what the system was told to expect, when the operators are making the sweep slower deliberately because they want to make sure they're reading it right. The Hedral Fleet was reading it right. They were reading it and understanding it, and in those 11 minutes and 14 seconds, a series of decisions were being made at the command level of a 70-ship military fleet that had never lost an engagement in 230 years. And the decisions were coming out in a direction that those commanders had not expected when they woke up that morning to be going. The voice that came on the channel, 11 minutes and 14 seconds after Emwand's last sentence, was not Admiral Sareth Cade's. It was a different voice. Slightly older in timbre, slightly more measured. It took me a moment to place it, and then I checked my Confederation diplomatic registry, and I had to read the entry twice. Fleet Commander Dorsan, Senior Flag Officer of the Hedral Deterrence Command, the Admiral's direct superior, the military authority one level above Sareth Cade, which meant that someone, in those 11 minutes, had escalated this situation all the way to the top of the operational chain. Captain Emwand, Fleet Commander Dorsan said, "I am speaking on behalf of the Hedral Deterrence Command." Fleet Commander, Emwand said, "I wasn't aware you were here." "I have been observing." A pause. "I am observing your vessel's current configuration." "Good," Emwand said. "I wanted it to be clear." "It is clear." Another pause longer. "Captain, I would like to speak frankly." "I would appreciate that." "In my career," Dorsan said, and his voice was a professional voice doing the very hardest version of its professional work, "I have faced many adversary vessels. I have faced vessels of great capability. I have not faced," he paused again. "I have not, in my experience, faced a vessel whose primary weapons system, based on the sensor data I am now reading, would, according to my tactical staff's analysis, be able to defeat our current formation before our own weapons could be brought to bear at effective range." The bridge was very quiet. "Your tactical staff is accurate," M1 said. A very long pause. "The ultimatum," Fleet Commander Dorisan said, "was issued in the context of a diplomatic assessment that characterized the human response as likely to be negotiation-oriented." "I know," M1 said. "We intercepted that assessment." Another pause, shorter, something that might, in a different context, have been the sound of someone recalibrating quickly. "I see. The assessment was not unreasonable," M1 said, and there was something almost gentle in her voice, not soft, not accommodating but genuine, like she was actually trying to be fair about it. "Humanity's responses to most border incidents have been negotiation-oriented. We believe in diplomatic solutions. We genuinely do. The Vesk corridor situation was, by any reasonable measure, a candidate for diplomatic resolution. A joint review committee, a boundary clarification, a shared resource agreement. Any of those outcomes would have been acceptable to Earth." "And yet," Dorisan said. "And yet," M1 agreed. "Your government issued an ultimatum with 48 hours to comply. An ultimatum is not an invitation to negotiate. An ultimatum is a demand delivered under threat of force. And when a demand is delivered under threat of force, the question that has to be answered is, do you comply with the demand or do you respond to the force?" She let that sit for a moment. Earth decided to respond to the force. What Fleet Commander Dorisan said next, the full exchange, running approximately 40 minutes, is on record in the Confederation Diplomatic Archive, accessible to any member species under the standard transparency protocols, and I won't reproduce all of it here because that's not the point of this account. The point of this account is what it felt like to be there. It felt like watching something very large and very old be very carefully moved by something that it hadn't expected to be capable of moving it. Dorisan was not weak. That's important to say. He wasn't a man who broke or who panicked or who became someone diminished by the situation he found himself in. He was exactly what his record said he was, a seasoned military commander of considerable experience and intelligence, representing a species with a genuine tradition of military excellence, in a situation that had not gone the way his intelligence assessment had suggested it would go. He negotiated in good faith. He genuinely did. The agreement that emerged over those 40 minutes, the Vesk Corridor Protocol, which is what the Confederation records call it, was not everything Earth wanted. It was not, in honesty, complete capitulation from the Hedral side. The mining operations on Vesk 3 were suspended pending a formal review. A joint resource management authority was established for the corridor, with equal representation from both sides. The reparations demand was withdrawn. The formal apology demand was withdrawn. The cession demand for the entire corridor was replaced by a mutual administration framework that, in practical terms, divided the space roughly evenly. Earth gave up some things. The Hedral gave up considerably more things, including the entire premise of their original ultimatum, which had been, comply or face the consequences of our 70-ship fleet. The consequences they had expected us to fear were their fleet. The consequence we had shown them was us. During the negotiations, while Captain M1 and Fleet Commander Dorisan worked through the language of the protocol, something happened on the tactical display that I noted and have thought about many times since. The Hedral fleet gradually, over the course of those 40 minutes, moved. Not in any tactically aggressive way. Nothing that could be called a withdrawal exactly. They maintained formation discipline, maintained military bearing, didn't do anything that would read as retreat or concession. But the formation shifted. The blocking line opened slightly. The combat dispersal pattern relaxed back toward something looser and more neutral. They were, without quite saying so, stepping back from the door. I watched them do it, ship by ship, the repositioning happening in small increments that were probably invisible to anyone not running constant tactical scans, And I thought about those 230 years. I thought about what it meant to carry that number, the weight of it, the identity built on it. And I thought about how the first serious challenge to that record had been resolved, not by a battle, not by a victory or a defeat in the conventional sense, but by a morning in the Vesk corridor when a human captain stood on her bridge and said, "We did not come here to talk," and meant it, and had the ship to mean it with.